Welcome to Thriller Bitcoin. Welcome to Thriller Bitcoin.
We just want to emote till we're dead. I know we suffer for fashion or whatever. We don't want these days to ever end. We just want to emasculate them forever. 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 Our pretty sirens don't go flat. It's not supposed to happen like that. Not like that. Not like that. We've got to keep it physical. When I tell you it's 6 hours away, please got to see that you miss me, feel me or whatever. The institutes are boxing our heads. They just want to emaciate them forever. 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 Our pretty sirens don't go flat. It's not supposed to happen like that. Not like that.
You know, I'm a huge fan of you and what you've done with PlebLab. That you know, you guys are really the tip of the spear out there. Getting you guys and Bolt.fun, I would say, are the two groups that are, you know, really finding the developers pre-company. Maybe they're, you know, even learning to code with you guys. And just, yeah, hats off. Like, y'all have also built such a cool community. Like, whenever I'm down in Austin, I find myself wishing we had a PlebLab here in San Francisco. So if anyone's listening to this and wants to start a PlebLab in SF, would love to see it. It's some really cool energy y'all built there.
Yeah, thank you. I think I figured it out. I think I figured out how to do PlebLab without that much capital anymore. So we just moved into this new space. So I've opened up 3 PlebLabs at this point. The first one at Capital Factory, the second one on 6th Street, and then this third one here in Brazos. So we're getting pretty good at opening up PlebLabs. But to go back to your question about, I think there's multiple teams. I think PlebLab is just primarily focused just on the Bitcoin business side and the Bitcoin startup side. We also have like Base 58 and Bitcoin Plus Plus, the TabComp people, Bolt.fun, like all these, like you said, there's multiple teams out there. We're just really niche on the Bitcoin business and Bitcoin startup side. But
yeah, no, it's sweet. And definitely just the community, man. I think that can't be overstated. Just the energy of walking into PlebLab and having you and Kian and Super and like, and I'm sure it's way bigger now. I mean, I haven't been in Austin like a year, but it's special. And, you know, you guys are what makes Bitcoin, the future of Bitcoin, bright. So I would love to see more PlebLabs everywhere.
So yeah, let's jump into it. Tell us about Hivemind. Tell us about, you're one of those guys. Like, I would just say this, people are listening at home, like, Max is one of those guys that when you talk to as a founder, he's going to be your best friend. Like, he's going to tell you everything you need to know. He's going to make you feel better. Even if it's bad news, he's going to deliver to you. But no, seriously, because I've had these conversations with other founders. And so can you just talk about why you go with that approach? Because there's other VCs that go with different approaches, but you have always been more earth grounded in that respect. So yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, I do my best to keep it real with people and speak my mind. You know, one advantage that I think I have 2 advantages. One, you know, I'm not like a quote unquote lifelong VC. You know, prior to starting Hivemind, I did invest in another fund, version 1, for about a year and a half. And I've run Hivemind for a little over 2 years. So, you know, I've been doing this for a while, and I've been in and around investing in sort of Silicon Valley for a little over a decade. But, you know, I was mostly, myself, you know, someone out there building stuff. I helped to start as the first hire a company called Bright, which is like Sunrun or Solar City from Mexico. I lived in Mexico for a long time, went back and forth, you know, to San Francisco. I had a lot of friends that were at software companies and, you know, AI companies. I had friends that were very early at OpenAI and DeepMind. And so I've gotten, you know, a first-hand ride with a lot of technology waves, but typically with the builders, with the engineers. And so that's just kind of my bias. I mean, I used to live with a lot of those guys, and I guess I think a little bit more like the builders and can empathize a bit more. And I also don't necessarily plan on being a VC forever. I mean, I think it's an extremely fun and challenging and interesting game, and it's a great opportunity to be one. But you know, I have always taken the approach with Hivemind that I only want to do this as long as I can add something new, as long as it's interesting for me, as long as you know, I see like a unique and sort of special opportunity. I don't want to live long enough to die the villain like a lot of venture funds have. So anyway, so that's kind of the first thing. And the second thing is because I've taken an approach where I keep my funds, very small and I'm a solo GP. I have no other partners. There's no one else on the team. Although some days it feels like it'd be more helpful to have some help, but being a solo GP is incredibly helpful for me, at least in my style, because there is no kind of like decision-making process per se. It's, I meet a founder. If I, think the market is interesting, I think the founder is interesting, I see that they have a path forward, like I can offer a term sheet on the spot. And I usually do. I'm pretty quick with deciding. And if I don't like something, I try my best not to waste people's time. Like when I was first getting into VC, and I went through, probably thousands of meetings in my last fund. Maybe that's a little hyperbole, but probably not. And at first I would say, oh, well, if this doesn't quite, fit, maybe we'll do a follow-up call. And, now it's like, I know I only have so many shots on goal. And if it's not a fit, I'll be honest and tell someone this is probably not a fit for me. And I'll tell them why. And I'll be like, as honest as I can be. And then try and offer whatever I think would be helpful for that person to hear, whether maybe they shouldn't be raising VC, or maybe there's another fund they should be talking to. So I think just being a solo GP and having, very limited bureaucracy around me helps me to keep it real, which I appreciate. And also keeping small funds. I only invest super, super early. Occasionally I've done some later stage stuff, to be in certain companies and around certain teams. But, the bread and butter of what I do is first money in. Usually it's 1-2 people, an idea, maybe a little bit of traction, and that's it. And that's the game that I enjoy. I have no desire or plans to ever, scale to something with larger funds and larger management fees and more bureaucracy and more modeling. I like being a cowboy, and, for now I have no plans to ever change that.
Awesome. Those are great answers. I have some follow-ups to that though. So as founders, when we deal with VCs and just in general, you get the kind that will just ghost you. They'll just straight up ghost you. They'll never talk to you again. We'll get the ones like you who actually tell you, hey, I'm not going to invest, but this is where you should be. This is where you should go to next, or at least some helpful advice. And then you get the third one where they'll just keep leading you on. Why do you think those three things exist for founders in the Bitcoin space specifically?
Well, I don't think that's specific to the Bitcoin space. I think that's like just the truth for VC. And, look, I've been on both sides of the table. I've also started things that, I mentioned I've been a part of early teams that have done well. And then I've started things myself, which have completely flopped. I remember when I was like 22 and we were trying to start an energy efficiency crowdfunding and then solar crowdfunding company, and like had really no business doing that. And, learned the hard way, trying to pitch people, having a lot of people dragging us on, and, people, oh, I'm going to invest, and saying, the check size ends up being 10x less. And so I've seen a lot of things, and I'll say this, I think most VCs are not malicious if they're ghosting you or whatever. Like the first thing to understand is like, I've been, quote unquote, an associate at a larger fund, and you just have so much on your plate that it's a lot. And, you have limited hours in the day, and, often higher ups that are asking you to do other things. And and it's like, it's easy to let things slip through the cracks, even if you don't mean to be malicious. And I think it's, it's sad because you have maybe a lack of empathy for the founder side as well. And I think that comes from maybe not having, been on both sides of the table. So I don't think it's really specific to Bitcoin VC. I think that's just an artifact of having, people with a lot on their plates, maybe haven't been in that other role before, and don't necessarily have that empathy. And I think as you, do this for a while, at least as I've done this for a while, you just get better at saying, nope, but here's why. Or, I've gotten even way more selective with meetings I'll take, because you just take so many meetings, you burn out. You don't want to do one more Zoom call. And so you kind of get a sense really quickly. For me, at least, I know there's only very few kind of like market opportunities that really get me excited. And so if it's not, in one of those market opportunities, and typically I write about those, I'll talk about them on podcasts and stuff like open source AI projects, Nostr related projects. And the first one, a lot of sort of Lightning infrastructure apps and some like local exchanges. But like, I've been very clear about what I'm interested in. And if it's not something I'm interested in, I'll just try and, nix that in the bud. But to your original question, I don't think it's a Bitcoin VC thing. I think that's just like a VC thing. And I think most people have good intentions. It just, it gets busy out there.
Yeah. So I want to keep going on this VC thing, because there's a lot of questions that a lot of us builders and founders have that we talk amongst ourselves, right? And then we can never get these answered. And this is why I'm having some people on. I want them to answer this. The next one is, so there's a lot of like, I don't know. It just started, Max. I don't remember hearing this 2 years ago, but I feel like there's a lot of prominent Bitcoiners who you would consider like very in high regard to amongst a lot of people, kind of hitting back on the Bitcoin VC thing and saying it's not right and its incentives are destructive and all the way down, ducks all the way down. And now they're getting to a point now where they're criticizing the builders because they're just building and trying to figure out new interesting ways to make Bitcoin businesses. What would be your kind of like your view on that when you see that out there? I don't know if you've been paying attention, but that's just kind of what I've been seeing a lot of here in the ground on Austin and stuff like that.
Well, first of all, I mean, look, to be clear, it's the builders that make all of this stuff possible. I mean, financing for the builders and, strategy and whatever else VCs offer. I mean, like that, sure, that's helpful. But at the end of the day, no builders, no industry, right? And so there's no question what's the most viable there and thing there. And to be clear, you can also see a lot of businesses that, grow very big with no financing at all. And increasingly, I think you're going to see a phenomenon where, you may raise a little bit of money at the beginning, maybe because you need it to quit your job, or maybe you need to make 1 or 2 or 3 key hires. But, I think as AI programming and UI and design tools continue to get better, like I fully expect to see unicorn teams that are like 10 people or fewer, without a doubt. And so, I think that means you may need a lot less capital, at least for like sort of traditional software businesses. And in that sense, I think that kind of changes the model of VC a bit because, and especially it's still interesting to me because as a seed or pre-seed, very early stage fund, that's still interesting to me because maybe I come in and you only take 1 or 2 rounds of financing ever. But if you can then ride that and, build a company that's doing, tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, which I think is very possible, then that can still be a really interesting outcome, an exciting outcome, both for the founder and for me as an early stage investor. I think that raises a lot of questions for some of the later stage big fund guys, though. And not to say that there's not going to be a role for that kind of financing. I think that there's no question that venture capital has a place in the economy. And I think people that just I think it's really easy, to kind of like throw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, VCs they suck and they do all this scammy stuff. And like, yeah, some VCs suck. Some VCs have done scammy stuff, but like, that's kind of ridiculous to levy risk capital as an asset class as all being that. I mean, what venture capital is really beautiful for, and what I think, you're going to see more of it for is, taking fundamental risk. And often that's real technological or market risk. So, if you're trying, particularly in sort of deeper tech stuff, right? Like you're trying to build, I don't know, new kinds of batteries or quantum computers or, gene editing tools, like there needs to be risk capital for that, right? Probably some maybe there was public financing for the actual basic science and then risk capital to try and commercialize it. And then I think for, increasingly for software and internet businesses, maybe you need a lot less venture capital, but there still might be real market risk. And that's why I feel like the asset class or the stage that I've gone at, it's never going to go away, where a little bit of money to get started and run some experiments and make first few hires, and, get some potentially valuable connections and advice. I don't think that's ever going to, fully go away. But so in general, I would just say, it's easy to spot a few bad actors and associate an entire asset class with it, and I think that's just kind of ridiculous. There always is going to be room for innovation, experimentation, and risk capital to finance experimentation. Full stop. Now, in a full Bitcoin standard, I do agree, that perhaps you're a little bit less wild with your money, right? That the value of your money is going to go up over time versus knowing the value goes down in a fiat economy, especially with zero interest rates that we've had for a long time. And I think that maybe means the bar gets higher to be able to raise this kind of financing. But I don't think the asset class will ever die. In fact, I think it will only expand over time as more people want to try cooler and riskier things.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, so I guess all the people that are kind of out there, against Bitcoin VCs, I mean, they just need to take a wider look, it sounds like, and realize that not everybody is acting in a nefarious or malicious way.
Well, and I also think it's just like, look, I mean, you can think, I think one thing that's really dangerous is to paint, to have a hammer, right? And then look for everything to be a nail. And you can have one tool and be like, Bitcoin is awesome. And everything's going to get repriced in sats. Like, yes, and not yes, but. Yes, and there will always be interesting people trying interesting new things with risk. And so I do think that, you're going to see the long tail of very small niche businesses, particularly with AI. And this is something I've talked with my buddy DK about on Nostr News a lot. Like, I do see a world where with generative AI, people are kind of like, speaking spells their software into existence. And that's awesome. And maybe you're going to see a ton more of these like sort of micro software companies, micro media companies, micro musicians where, the whole Kevin Kelly Thousand True Fan thing, if anyone hasn't, heard of that or read that, Google Thousand True Fans, excellent thesis, more than a decade old now. Also just shout out Kevin Kelly. That dude's just been right like over and over and over again. Anyways. And, I think he's absolutely right and more right in this current world with micropayments with Bitcoin and Lightning and now generative AI, and the ability to go direct to your customer like you're doing right now with your podcast. Like there's going to be a lot more people doing cool things that never need to raise financing. And they're doing, relatively small businesses that finance their lifestyles. And that's awesome. But on the other hand, I think this is something that, sort of just like with the rise of modernity and the rise of technology, there's more of everything, right? So there's going to be a lot more of that. And there's going to be a lot more people that are trying really big, bold, ambitious ideas that are also, risky in either technological and or market ways. And they want to raise financing. And for whatever reason, they do want to try and build a major company. Something else, I did a podcast yesterday. I haven't done podcasts in a while. Now I'm doing 2 back-to-back. So
Nice.
This is kind of fun. I think, it's also really easy to be like, oh, the big companies now, man, they're so evil. Like, I hope we never have Googles and Apples and Facebooks again. And I think one thing to keep in mind is even in a Bitcoin economy with, sats and standards and stats flows, like there's still an economy, right? You still have, even if the revenue or the flows are in sats instead of dollars, like you can still build big businesses with recurring revenues. Like that doesn't change. It's just now denominated in Bitcoin, right? And so I think that, one way of thinking about business models is, yes, a lot of companies have gotten really big and really bloated because they're the intermediary. They're the middleman. And yeah, we're going to cut out middlemen with Bitcoin, Lightning, Nostr. I'm sure all kinds of new decentralized technologies that are going to emerge over the next decade. And that's awesome. But it doesn't mean we can't still have really, really big businesses. I think maybe we won't see, the next wave of super unicorns or whatever you want to call them, really big companies that are as big in terms of percentage of global GDP. But in terms of absolute terms, I think they'll be even bigger. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about payments, it's a very simple example. In the current world, your payment networks, your Visas, your MasterCards, any of your payment companies, typically they're taking whatever 3%, cut on whatever payment flow they're processing, maybe a fee in addition to that. Well, maybe with the Lightning Network, the order of magnitude falls 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. So maybe instead of taking 3%, now you're taking 0.3%, right? So yes, your take rate is much lower, but maybe because with the Lightning Network and Nostr opening up the size of markets, right? For example, now we're going to have 8 billion people instead of whatever we have 3 billion people that are really connected to global finance and the internet. Now you have a much larger market of humans. You're about to have trillions of human intelligences that are going to be banked with Lightning Network wallets. It's another big thesis of mine. And you're going to have all kinds of crazy new business models with micropayments that just straight up weren't possible until right now. So what happens when you have billions more humans, trillions more AIs, and all kinds of new business models? Well, the size of the global pie should just get way, 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 way bigger. And in that world, even if your take rate is smaller, your absolute numbers might actually be bigger than the current crop of companies. So I think there's absolutely still going to be public companies. There's absolutely still going to be venture capital, maybe a sort of stricter or, less let's say, less ridiculous risk, and true technological or true interesting business model risk world. But I think you're just going to see more of everything, more indie makers, more venture backed makers, just more software, more creativity. Yeah, I'm bullish on the future.
That's awesome. Now, thank you for answering that, because, some people don't know. All they hear are the people with the loudest, the loudest voice and the biggest following. So they don't really know what's actually going on behind the scenes. And one thing that gets failed to mention a lot of times are the LPs in this kind of process, right? And how and where they come from and what they're allocating to and what they're hoping that comes from a fund. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, what do you mean specifically? Like why LPs are interested in venture capital?
Yeah, just because from one of the back channel stuff I'm hearing is just there's a lot of crypto LPs that are now coming over into, because they're like, oh wow, Bitcoin is actually going to be here for their long term. They're no longer playing these casino games behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I guess to take a step back, So if you don't, I guess now this works. I mean, if you're raising money, and by the way, you can raise from more than just quote unquote venture capital. So if you're raising from an individual angel investor, as an example, that's just maybe someone that made a lot of money. Maybe they sold a company and they want to invest some of that money back into you. It's their own money. Typically, someone like that's pretty easy to work with. Not always. If they're not a professional, I say be careful because if they've only made one investment ever and you go under, they're going to be really mad. So that's always something to watch out for. But but like it's their money, they know what they're getting into, and that's kind of one risk profile. If you deal with an institutional venture capital fund, that means that the investor has raised money from outside partners or limited partners, and they're the general partner that actually can sort of deploy that capital. Maybe they've committed a small or hopefully a larger percentage of the fund themselves. More skin in the game is definitely good for incentive alignment, but like the majority of the funds they're deploying are from other people's money, and other people's money can come from other places. It can be high net worths, people that are just very wealthy, either old money or new tech money or whatever. They have a lot of money, and for whatever reason they see venture capital as an interesting asset class they want exposure to. It could be other institutions, sometimes larger venture funds. Like my venture fund has some larger venture funds that are invested in there, and then it can be sort of the more traditional the large asset allocators. And so this could be university endowments, it could be pension funds, things like that. Typically smaller funds are going to be more high net worths and maybe a couple of like bigger venture funds. That's like what predominates for me. A larger fund, if you're raising, hundreds of millions of dollars, then you're probably raising from pension funds and endowments. And typically, all of those guys have their own kind of risk appetite. Like entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley maybe will invest a lot of their money into their venture funds just because that's how they made their money. That's the game they know and they feel comfortable with it. Larger pension funds that maybe have billions of dollars in their management, maybe for them VC allocation is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, depending on how comfortable they are with it. And maybe that grows over time. And so I think that, I do think that LPs, I can only speak for myself, but I mostly raised from, high net worths and some, a few institutions, but I also am, traditionally doing smaller funds. My fund one was a $21 million fund. And I don't want to go too much larger. I like, investing absolute first money in. So I've been very fortunate that most of my capital partners, they certainly, almost all of them were Bitcoiners before. So they get the Bitcoin thesis. They also kind of very much believe in our mission, which is super, super helpful for us to have mission aligned capital all the way up and down the stack. Like everyone wants to make money, of course, but my LPs, for the vast majority of them, are not interested in shitcoining or trying to pump and dump on retail. Now, a lot of endowments and larger institutional funds, sadly, you look at the amount of Bitcoin venture capital, and there's a couple of funds out there doing this. But like, there's not that many, right? In the grand scheme of things, the vast majority, of venture capital is out here in the Bay Area, where I'm based in San Francisco, and obviously AI is the kind of the topic du jour. But a lot of these funds went all in on quote unquote crypto over the last couple of years, and I do think that set us back a while. I think crypto in general has set everyone back, and I get why Bitcoiners become maximalists and toxic and frustrated. I don't think toxicity is ever the answer. But I get it. It's like super frustrating for me to go to an event and be like, oh, I invest in Bitcoin. Oh, you're a crypto guy. It's like, no, I have nothing to do with crypto. Oh, FTX. I'm like, I have nothing to do with that. But anyways, I do think, in some ways with a lot of the bigger, capital pools, it did set us back because, these guys, they're not doing this. Like, this is not their only full-time obsession. So for them, crypto, Bitcoin kind of means the same thing. And, some of them I think are starting to come around. I've had some crypto funds reach out to me recently, and, but there's still like a lot of education, hurdle there. And like, people still don't get the difference. I think it's changing, and the longer Bitcoin's around and continues to thrive, it will change, and a lot of that money will come back here. But I think it's a long and slow process. And so, I do think it's always worth at least asking, a VC, who are your LPs? Where do they get the money from? Like, are they committed to the thesis or not? Generally speaking, much better to have LPs that get Bitcoin and believe in the mission.
Wow, thank you for answering that, Max. That's just what a lot of founders want to know. Incentives are aligned all the way down, right? Like, it's tough to build on Bitcoin these days. You got to really find your niche, and like you said, the raises are getting a lot smaller now, and the expectations are a lot higher. So it's good to see that there's people like you out there championing that. Yeah,
and just to keep it real with everyone, I will say that, for me, when I raised my first venture fund, frankly, it was a lot easier because I was at the height of the last bull, so 21, early 22, and people were a lot, I think, Bitcoin was maybe it touched 69K, even if it didn't. I'd like to think it at least touched 69K, and maybe the next high will be 420. You know, there's a certain cosmic levity I find. But you know, I will say, although there are still, you know, people that are really committed, I think in general, and not just for Bitcoin VC, to be clear, it's not like, oh, it's just a Bitcoin thing. Like, unless you're like right in the middle of the AI hype cycle, I think a lot of venture funds have had a lot more trouble raising in this environment. And it makes sense, right? Like interest rates are made much higher. So the expected sort of hurdle you have to clear is much higher. People are a lot more, and you also have to remember, right? Like unless you have, like, this is also something very important for raising money all the way up and down the stack with your venture fund, with their LPs. You know, I much prefer just working with high net worth individuals if I can, because it's just so much easier. Just like I think working with me as a VC is very easy because it's just me.
Right.
I make the decision, I write the check, it's done. There is no like process and debate and let me get this person to read this deck and check off.
Or all these other managing partners, or it's a whole decision thing, right?
It's a pain in the ass. And the same with LPs. If you have a big institutional fund, and you know, and I've seen this, and you know, I won't name any names here, but there are big endowments that I've spoken with, and there's champions inside those endowments that love what we're doing.
Nice.
And I've let them come into the fund personally, and they're like, bro, if I could, believe me, we would move a big check in here. But like, I have, 5 levels of clearance I have to get. The managing partner is 70 years old and still is like, doesn't understand, the difference between Bitcoin. It's just, so you just have to remember, like, the more bureaucracy up and down the stack, the harder it gets. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, right? Like if you're managing really big pools of capital, probably good to have some bureaucracy around that. But I do think in the game of like early stage entrepreneurship, early stage venture capital, like keep it simple. Same thing with founders. Like I typically, and I made a few exceptions here, but typically don't like big teams. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but one of my favorite founders of all time is Kian. And I really believe that Kian can build Stacker News into one of the biggest companies in the world. I really believe that. I'm so bullish on him. Maybe a couple of like full and part-time devs, and that's it. And I love that because it just keeps everything so easy. And so, yeah, that's my preference.
That's great. Okay, so let's jump into, before we get into Lightning and Bitcoin and wax poetic about all that stuff, because that's the easy stuff. I want to get into more hard stuff, but thank you for answering all these questions. You're so transparent, Max. I love it. There's not a lot of people like you out there, but so thank you for that. Let's talk about Nostr and AI. What's going on just on the fund side in Bitcoin? Like there's really only a couple Bitcoin VCs out there actually investing in Nostr. Is it because it's so early and it's so just the cream right now? There's just not a lot of really good projects out there. Like I don't see the vast majority of Bitcoin VCs investing in Nostr. What's stopping the rest of them from investing in Nostr right now?
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, I mean, I think for better or for worse, we'll see how this works out for me. But I've invested in 4 or 5 like Nostr exclusive companies, and then a bunch of my other companies, like Stacker News, like Alby, like Ellen Bits, like Fountain, like Wave Lake, have like Geyser have backed into becoming Nostr companies. And so I can say pretty with almost certainty that I think I've been the most active. I think I've been both the most active Lightning and Nostr investor, but definitely the most active on Nostr. And I think for me, it comes down to early conviction and loving the kind of, one, believing in what we're doing. And I'm very sort of mission driven on this. 2, loving the risk reward profile of coming in that early. I definitely think that, again, and different VCs have different stages, right? So a lot of VCs, they're going to say like, okay, well, we need to wait until we see some traction to kind of have the risk reward profile make sense. And depending on your stage and your fund size, that makes a ton of sense. But the thing is, for me, I'm typically coming in, if I can get in, as the absolute first money at what I consider to be a very fair valuation for us. Like, obviously I'm not a charity. Like I want to, if we do well, I want, with one check, the minimum is to return the fund. By the way, this is something really important for founders to understand. If I have a $21 million fund, any check I write, I need to believe at an absolute minimum, with very few exceptions that I might do for strategic reasons. But like, let's say 95% of cases that the check that I write at time of exit, my percentage ownership in that company is at least going to return my fund. So as an example, I'm typically writing checks between $250K and $1 million. So if I'm writing a check for $250,000, let's just say $210,000, keep the math easy, then I need to believe that my ownership percentage. Maybe I'm, if I'm investing at, a 3 or 4 or 5 mil post, maybe that means I'm walking away with somewhere like 5, 10, maybe a little bit more percentage ownership. If that's the case, then I need to believe that, after all the different rounds of dilution. And so I also have to try and kind of like think in my head, well, like how much money does this company need to raise before they may one day have an exit, which means getting acquired or going public, or potentially in the future issuing dividends, which is kind of a model I think might become more common. But, how much am I going to get diluted? And so, back of the envelope math, if I'm investing 210K, I need to believe I'm in 100X on one investment. So if I'm investing in a 5 mil post, to make it really, really easy math, and I might get diluted, so I actually might need to be higher than this, but I need to believe it's going to exit for at least $500 million,
Wow.
right? You need to return the fund. That's a minimum. That's the absolute minimum. What I really want is to invest in a 5 mil post or a 4 mil post, let's say, and believe it's going to exit for $4 billion or more, right? Go public. And I also understand that's extremely rare, or even 40 billion or something like that, right? But that to me is the game that I love. Like the reason I love super, 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 super early stage VC is because you have, very capped known downside. I know exactly what my downside is. If I write a $250K check and the company goes to zero, I lost $250,000. I know, but my upside is unlimited. And I think that's something that, maybe one advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you look at that, I have is, kind of growing up professionally in and around Silicon Valley. I've seen so many of my friends that have gone through this, where maybe they joined as engineer number 2. This is, true story at a company like Benchling, or one of my friends was the first researcher at OpenAI. So I've seen these cases where they're equity 100 or 1,000x or more. And so I know it's possible. And to be clear, I think that's been very rare outside of the Bay Area ever. I think that's changing around the world, but that's something that we've seen happen over and over and over and over again here. So that's kind of the model I've taken. And I, not exactly do the same approach. I don't spread it out nearly as much, but I really like the kind of YC model of like, look, if you get in early enough and you back really smart people exploring ideas that are interesting, maybe the idea shifts a lot, but it's in a market where, you could see if it goes right, it goes really, really right. You can 1,000x or 10,000x on that investment. That's super interesting to me, because then I can strike out every deal except for one. Ideally, that's not what happens. And I do have some mental diversification where I can fund more. And I had a bunch of these kind of like local exchange and lightning nodes. Those I think are going to be really good businesses. Maybe not Google's, but like each could return the fund. But I really like placing more of these big, big bets where it's risky, but if it works, it really, really works. And that can only work if you're comfortable, with a lot of losses with cap downside, but understanding 1 or 2 wins can return everything many, many times over. So I forgot exactly what the original question was.
No, that was. So the original question was to go back to Nostr, because a lot of builders, right. So like we were talking about incentives earlier, right? So what's my incentive to get Nostr devs going here, to do courses around Nostr? What's my incentive to get like an AI meetup going, or to do like the lightning stuff and do the cutting edge stuff? This is what the builders want to do. But on the Bitcoin business side, the Bitcoin BC side, there's not a lot of y'all allocating to that thing. So for me personally, when people are like, "Oh, Carl, you don't want to do that," well, they can't do a business even if they wanted to go that route. So that's where I'm trying to tell you is like, how do we get more Bitcoin BCs to invest in Nostr? Is it just a kind of a time?
Well, I think we need to start to see some traction for sure. Which I think we kind of, but why do I feel comfortable taking some swings here? Because the risk reward, one, because I really believe in this, right? Like, unlike a lot of Bitcoiners and Bitcoin VC, like I'm not like a digital gold guy. Like I get it. It's great. But like, man, it's like, how many times can you say it? Like, we get it. It's 21 million and it's fixed. That's awesome. And by the way, my thesis is it's energy backed money. Shout out to Andrew Myers from Satoshi Energy that first helped me see that. And yes, it's amazing. And I'm super sold, but like, that's super boring to me. Now, what's interesting is, now that we have this energy-backed currency, scaling it, right? And once you can scale it, like the way I think about it is, if Bitcoin it's not digital energy like Saylor says, that's incorrect. It is energy-backed money, right? And that's a very important difference, because, what it's basically saying is that what Bitcoin is it's built off of markets. Drew Bansel at Unchained says this very eloquently. The innovation of Bitcoin, it's not the blockchain, it's not anything technical. Technical things are necessary, but not sufficient. The innovation is markets. And so the first layer 1 market is a market for energy to be traded for compute. Great. That's what creates the actual asset. Then on top of that, you can start to scale it, just like in the OSI model for the internet. You can start to scale that just like we did with communications, for using that money. And so that's why my fund one was almost exclusively focused on the Lightning Network, because it's like, okay, now that we have this, how do we make it useful? Well, the reason, and by the way, that I called my fund Hivemind instead of some Bitcoin thing is I'm interested in sort of arc of evolution and self-emergent intelligence and complexity. And so what I see happening here is you've got Bitcoin now as this digital currency. Now, what I see the Lightning Network is laying what I'll call the metabolic pathways for a superorganism. And so Bitcoin you can think of as analogous to like ATP in a cell. And these Lightning pathways allow you to move that representation of energy. And now you're going to start to see what I believe is a behavior very similar to emergent biological behaviors. And so that's very interesting to me, right? Because now you can start to see real-time economies, and economies are just like superorganisms that are shifting around representations of energy, just like in the biological world. And so that's super cool to me. And I think there's obviously a lot of upside around that. But then there's still some problems. If you want to build a truly open web and a truly open, sort of hive mind, you need a way to move that data around as well. And so at first, and I'm still open to this, Ryan at Lightning Labs and Drew have talked about this, maybe there's going to be a layer on top of Lightning directly where you actually have to pay for every packet that's moved around. And I do think in the long run, we're going to see, peer-to-peer networks for physical infrastructure delivered digitally. So things like storage, bandwidth, compute. We've already seen compute with GPUtopia.ai as like a first example of this. Those are all going to emerge. And this is actually kind of sci-fi, but my idea of like a Bitcoin Ouroboros, right? The snake eating its tail, where you have Bitcoin, Lightning on top of Bitcoin, some layer either on top of it, or maybe it's Nostr, which I think is most likely right now, diagonally tethered into Lightning. So if you want to, eventually pay to post or read from a relay, you'll pay some sats with that. That eventually gives the ability to meter and go out there and build peer-to-peer wireless infrastructure like a mesh network, which then will self-host Bitcoin, right? So it's literally self-hosting itself, which I think is just wild and crazy. And that's what I think is happening. But you need that layer. If Bitcoin is decentralized value network, a decentralized value network, Lightning is a decentralized payment network, you need a decentralized data or communication network. And that's what I think Nostr is. And so why am I willing to take some early bets here? Well, it may be very early. And in fact, some of my LPs that I really respect, when I started my fund one for Lightning, in 2021, they're like, look, I get it. I think your thesis is right. You might be early. And if you're early, sadly, that's as good as being wrong, because maybe your first wave of companies won't be able to raise enough financing. They won't make it through, enough of the hype cycles. They'll die. And then, that would suck for us as a fund. And that's true. And that is a big risk. And I think I'm taking that risk again right now with Nostr. But the way I would say that is the risk adjusted reward, in addition to the fact that I just want to see this stuff happen. And I truly am.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Lightning and Nostr pledge.
Yeah.
I believe it, right? But from an investor perspective, the risk adjusted reward, right? Like the people that invested in Lightning Labs in 2016 or 2017, I was way too early. None of that stuff existed. But you know what? I would much rather invest in a sub 10 mil post than whatever their last valuation was.
Wow.
Right?
That's a great answer.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's the way I look at this, is like when I'm investing in these Nostr, I'm investing in teams. I'm investing in literally individuals, people like Kian. And I look at them and I'm like, this person is super smart. And they're super resilient. Are we maybe a year or two early? Totally could be, maybe even a couple of years early. Do I believe this person is sharp enough, committed enough, ships fast enough, resourceful enough, frugal enough that they can cockroach if they have to and ride that next wave? Totally. And if they do, and one of them pops off and becomes like the big infrastructure company or the big application on there, and I got in a 3 mil post versus a 30 or a 300, I'll take that all day, every day. That's the name of the game I'm in. So to me, I think that the key that got me comfortable with that is having early conviction. And, I got strong conviction on Bitcoin when I realized it's energy backed money. I got strong conviction on Lightning over many years, but when I started to see the smartest minds in the space, people like Lalu, people like Steve Lee and Matt Corallo, like the more people that were going there, the talent magnet, I was like, okay, it seems like this is getting a critical density of like really big brains that are going to build out the infrastructure. Probably a good bet. With Nostr, what I love about it, to be clear, I had the least conviction of the three. Like I had the highest conviction on Bitcoin, obviously. Lightning a little bit less. Nostr definitely less. But it's so simple. Like someone is going to create a easy or like a countless way to transmit data on the internet. That's going to happen. And what I love about Nostr is it's like your identity is just a public-private key, Bitcoin public key, interestingly enough, which has interesting properties, but it's just a public key. It's like basic cryptography. And then the information you're sending is like a JSON blob with 7 fields or whatever. It's just so dumb and so simple, but that's why it's going to win, I think. And so anything else is like over-engineered and over-complex. And I don't believe that stuff works in reality. In reality, I think the way biology evolves or builds is you have something very simple. And then on top of that, you build something a little bit more complex. But it's this hole-on theory of like holes become parts of new holes, become parts of new holes, all the way up and all the way down. And so I think Nostr, it's going to be hard for anything to back its simplicity. The other thing, or to break its to sort of like outperform on simplicity. The other thing that gets me really bullish on Nostr, besides the fact that we already have Lightning payments, we already have a native community, the people that I know and trust are already building on there, is, you say there's not funding, but there actually is. And huge shout out to Jack Dorsey and OpenSats, right? Like they've given so many grants to some of the smartest people out there, non-dilutive, non-equity grants. Equity is not the only way to raise money. I plan to back many of these guys as they get sharper. Some of them I already have. But the fact that there's dozens of these dudes at this point, and probably dudettes as well, although I'm not sure. But they're not going anywhere. And God bless OpenSats and Jack. Their commitment to this space gives me a lot more confidence.
Yeah. I just wish there was more people personally just on my side, because I see a lot of people wanting to implement Nostr and they have to, because they're trying to make a Bitcoin business, right? So they have to rethink all of that. That's just what I'm seeing on the ground. But
and I would say just one last thing on that, like, don't force it, right? Like if it doesn't make sense to just like force Nostr in your app, and you probably don't need it. The people that are obsessed with Nostr for whatever reason, like they already know who they are, and that's great. I would say, if you're coming to Nostr, think about what new problem it can solve. And so for me, the social media thing, it's cool, but like I never thought that was going to be the big thing. Like maybe one day, but it's super network effects. Anyone that we bring in for Twitter can now come to new apps. I think something new, like a decentralized marketplace. I don't know for what. Maybe it's compute, maybe it's agents, like Christopher's thing, open agents. Maybe it's local Bitcoins, but some kind of marketplace seems very promising. So if I were an entrepreneur, I'd probably be exploring that.
There's a team in Top Builder right now called Shopster. I don't know. We'll see. Bullish on them.
What do they do?
Well, I'll tell you after the show. But this is where it's cool being PlebLab, is we get a lot of these really cool, cutting edge guys, and then when you think through it with them, then they're like, yeah, it's pretty cool. So the other thing, talk about AI now. Same thing I'm seeing with AI. Like, it's so early. I think Christopher's the only one that I know is actually doing something that's like, he's moving so fast. He's working out of the lab now with open agents. Like, what's your thoughts on AI? Is it Fugazi? Are we there as Bitcoiners? L402s? I know those work. You're seeing it with Cascader and stuff. So what are you thinking there? Well,
I think first of all, AI is here to stay. And as I wrote in my piece about a year ago, like we kind of have a choice. Are we going to have, are you going to use centrally controlled AI or something that's, in the spirit and ethos of Bitcoin, Lightning, and Nostr open? I know where I'm placing my bets, both philosophically and as a fund, definitely in the open category. So AI is not going anywhere. And I think that, again, it's about solving real challenges. And so there are a couple other builders that are doing cool stuff. Christopher, I think, is definitely the farthest along right now. But I think there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. For example, who will actually pay with sats to do anything with AI? Right now, if you're a developer here in San Francisco, you're either just using the OpenAI API because it's easy. You're paying with your credit card on Stripe. Or like last night I was at an open source model meetup. And like, by the way, those models just keep getting better and better, which is awesome. Like the Mistral and all those models. And the people there, they maybe want to run it on their, an open source model on their own machine, or maybe in someone else's cloud, and they don't want to share their data with OpenAI for philosophical reasons, or maybe it's cheaper, so economic reasons, but they don't know about or care about Bitcoin. Or worse, they think it's part of crypto, which is so frustrating for me. But so for those people, unless they're very ideologically driven, which some of them are, but the majority are not, it doesn't matter. So I think they will use Lightning and Nostr if it solves a problem for them. So I don't know how we're going to kind of bootstrap this truly OpenAI marketplace. I think Christopher's 2 bets are the best that I've seen so far. GPUtopia, plug in a GPU, get paid out in sats, or open agents, launch an agent, get paid out in sats. And there's a couple of reasons either of those could work. One, maybe I live outside of the US or Europe or Japan and I'm outside of the traditional financial system. Maybe I'm a kid in Nigeria and this is the easiest way for me to get paid. That could work. Maybe I want to use uncensored models that I don't want to be lobotomized. That could certainly work. Maybe it's a lot cheaper. I don't know. And I don't know what's going to kind of kickstart this. My guess is there's going to be some use case where people are either Bitcoiners with sats or people that for whatever reason, they can't use the traditional means, just like how Bitcoin got bootstrapped. Maybe it'll even be kind of gray legal areas. Maybe it'll be, outside of the US financial systems, but someone's going to need access to OpenAI, actually OpenAI, and Lightning and Nostr might be the best way for them to do it. Once that spins up, eventually it'll become a standard for all the reasons that we've talked about with open standards, just because open innovation always wins. And so in the long run, I'm very bullish on all this stuff because anything that's open to anyone will always outperform the closed systems, full stop. But how do we get started? I think that still remains to be seen. And I've taken, I made one investment here with Christopher, but I'm very open and excited to make many more. But what I would love to see, and if there's a builder listening to this, is some unique insight. Why would someone use Sats or Nostr, but let's say probably Lightning Payments is going to come first. Why would they use your product with that? I don't know. And if you have a unique insight, hit me up.
Yeah, I would say just from seeing it here on the ground, I think the biggest thing that, and I've written about this on Thriller, biggest thing that we're going to see with the AI and Nostr, or AI and specifically the Lightning side, is just the surveillance. All surveillance runs upstream. So I think when I look at this and I'm looking at projects built inside the lab and here in Austin, I think the biggest thing that you're going to pony up your sats for your Bitcoin for is going to be because you want that VPN like feature, right? You want that type of thing. And I think that's going to be the catalyst. Maybe it won't happen this year. Maybe it won't happen next year, but at some point, when I talked to Christopher about this, it's like at some point Altman's going to go full communist, right? That's just the natural occurrence of how these kind of big conglomerates go about. Now, I don't know the guy. I'm sure he's a great individual, but I will say as Bitcoiners, there's some people on the ground already building and they're anticipating that. And I think when I look at you asked that question, how are they going to pony up their sats for? I think it's just for that VPN, that kind of access. Doesn't mean it'll always be that way, but I suspect at some point that's just how it's going to play out. But it's so early though.
You very well could be right. I mean, I hope the crackdown or whatever, I hope it doesn't get too dystopian first, but it very well might. And if that's the case, I'm glad we have our open networks.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump into Lightning. Why is Keon so great? Like, why did he skate to the puck where a lot of us kind of saw early on, Max, where it was going to go? I think there was when I look at that time in 21, it was like Oscar, Keon, and like, who else am I forgetting there? Like, who else were the people that kind of saw this value for value props so early? I know right now, when I look into the space right now, there's one team specifically, I'm thinking of Wavelake, where they're just they're going to flip the script on the whole thing. What do you think that is, Max? Why is
first of all, I'm stoked to be investors in all those guys. And in that early stage, Roy from Breeze saw a lot.
Oh yeah. Roy too. Yeah. How did I miss Roy? Yeah.
But, I mean, look, well, I have my thoughts, but I'm going to flip the question.
No. Give me your thoughts first.
Hold up. You sit with Keon every day. I watch you guys,
you watch Stacker News Live?
Stacker News Live. You see lots of builders. You tell me first, like, why is he so awesome? Like he is, but you see a lot of people.
Yeah, I think I've come to realize, like, when you meet people, there's just especially for Bitcoin founders, there's just a certain thing. Maybe it's just the twinge in their eye where they're just built different. So that's one thing. You need that. And then the second thing is just the massive brain power, right? But it's also the humbleness that gets attached to that, knowing that you don't know the answer, knowing how to find it, and that kind of thing. And then it's just also just like you wanting to build what you want in the world, and you want that to happen, and then you figure out a way to how to make it happen. I don't know. That's just kind of what I see. I go to him for advice all the time with my stuff. I'm like, hey, how are you thinking through this? Sometimes he's wrong. Most often he's right, and it pisses me off. But when he is wrong, I make sure to just say, like, you were wrong. I was right. Finally, There
you go. You got to make sure to rub it in. Keep that humbleness is one of the traits, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, man. I think they're, like you, I've, had the fortune to be around a lot of founders and builders over the years, not just in Bitcoin, but in all kinds of startups. and yeah, I mean, like you absolutely can, I think, and this is why I mentioned, like I'm being way stricter with taking meetings and stuff these days. Cause I know the markets I'm interested in, but B, like I can just kind of tell real fast, like before I meet with the founder, I love to just like read something they've written or like listen to them on a podcast. And like, you can tell within 5 or 10 minutes or less, like, is this person just like, is their intellectual horsepower off the charts or not? And if it is, okay, cool. That's like necessary, but not sufficient. Then I think what's so rare, particularly with Kian, I think Oscar has some of this as well. Oscar's also very smart. By the way, I think he was like an aeronautical engineer. Obviously, Kian's like self-taught everything, like a true polymath. The physicists, I love the physicists. Although sometimes they struggle to like build the business part, but because they have too many interesting ideas. But I think something else that Kian in particular has, besides, I mean, he's clearly got the big brain. Clearly, has been through the fire. It's not his first startup, right?
Yeah.
He's tried things. He seems works. He's humble enough to know what he doesn't know and learn stuff, but like also taste. Like you just can't quantify that. It's so rare to find a really technical person that has like good taste.
That's a
taste
good point.
in music, taste in art. Like Kian's site is beautiful. Oscar also, like he coded, I mean, like there's still some stuff that needs to be done with founder or whatever, but like he did almost all that himself too. And it's like, when you meet these people, you're like, how are you so smart? And like, kind of like, the protocol level, big brain, but yet like, and with both those guys as well, like reading interesting books, listening to interesting podcasts, listening to good music. Like I hate to say it, but that's something else. Like I like to hear like what kind of bands are people into like that. And it sounds ridiculous, but I think it says a lot about someone's taste.
That's interesting. I never thought of it like that. Yeah. I think Rook helps a lot with that too, if we're being honest. Rook has some really good taste. Kevin Rook. He works behind the scenes. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
I think there's
he's another guy, right? Like, and it's, to be clear, it doesn't have to be one dude. Like if you can have a team that, maybe bring some of these skill sets together, even better.
Yeah. Gosh, dude. Thank you for coming on the pod and talking about all this stuff, dude. You're so real with all your questions, man. You so honest. I appreciate that. I mean, founders appreciate that. You're one of those guys that came in the early days of PlebLab in 21, and all of us were like, "Yo, Max is here! Yo, Max is here!" And we're all just like, high fiving each other, and we're just hanging out like, just Bitcoiners and stuff. So you definitely get that out of people, Max. That's really cool.
Well, I appreciate it. And, I'll never forget. Yeah, I guess in 21, when I came and visited you guys, it was like snowing and, like Austin. So first of all, y'all have incredible energy down there. I love all the builders, but like the couple of times I visited Austin, it's either been like 120 or like ice storm. So I need to come visit in the fall when it's nice. But yeah, in the ice storm, I was like, surely no one will be there. And I come into PlebLab and y'all are like all still there. And I was like, okay, this is something's happening here. The icy roads did not prevent all these guys from coming and building. So that was, I think, really strong signal. But I think, yeah, man, like, I just think it's so cool that you guys have a place that you built, and like, kudos to you, man. Like, I miss that. It's something that when I was at Bright in Mexico, I loved coming to the office every day and seeing my friends and working on cool projects. And, I have friends in SF and stuff, but I really miss having that hub, and I hope we get it again. I think it's just so special. And, forget the money, forget the companies, just like being able to do cool stuff with your friends is like, what's better in life, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, like we and Keon were always going to do this. It's just, we have a company attached to it. It was always, we were always going to work together in some capacity, whether it's just like doing separate things, but it's kind of fun.
Carl, while I've got you, if I could flip the script one more time, and you asked me a bunch of stuff on AI and also whatever, you're closer to the ground than anyone. What are you excited about right now?
I think for me, just here in Austin specifically, I think for me, there's just this big kind of L2 conversation happening, whether it's Fedi, Liquid, or it just whatever sidechain that is, right? I think like this is like the biggest conversations that are happening in and around the builders right now. They're all trying to figure out what's actually being told the truth, what's actually not being told the truth. And I just think that a lot of them are kind of looking out there right now and what they're doing. Also, we know ARC is going to be doing some stuff, and Lightning Labs is doing their thing. And so and then you also have like Core Lightning, right? They're going to be doing some interesting things. So I think there's just a lot of that discussion happening right now. And then the other thing, I think there's a small little group of us here in Austin that are very interested about the AI stuff. So much so where every time we do an AI workshop, Christopher just did one last week, but there's just people that we would never grab, Max, from outside coming in, and they're finding out, oh, this is a Bitcoin thing here. Like, and then they figure out that later. Right. So I think that's another really interesting thing on the ground that I'm seeing. And then right now I feel like that's why I asked all the Nostr questions, because a lot of them also are wondering, like, is it worth my time to go and build on Nostr knowing that there's no, it's so early. And I think that wasn't the same thing a year ago or even 6 months ago. That's just kind of what I'm seeing on the ground. Doesn't mean my perception is real or not, but that's just kind of what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's super fair. And again, I would say on that point, like if it's a tool that helps you solve a problem, for example, if you wanted to build, just super simple example, but local Bitcoins today, Nostr makes a ton of sense to build it on. Why? Because you can have a shared order book with lots of apps, which means a lot more liquidity, and you inherit all the Bitcoin users that are, on the Nostr social media apps. Like those people are your customers, right? So for something like that, I think it's like a clear slam dunk. For some of these kind of like more out there apps, I don't know. But again, I would kind of use the example of maybe Kian in 2021 when he was working on Stacker News. Like that was early. I think very few people thought it was time for Lightning apps, but he kind of looked ahead of the curve and had the skills to be able to, run his own infrastructure he needed, and yet also build this really cool app on top of it. So if Nostr allows you to do something new and you have people, particularly in the Bitcoin community, that's probably your early adopters that would use it, like absolutely do it. But I wouldn't just like shove Nostr in there to shove Nostr in there.
There's like I was telling you, there's a team in Top Builder that I think they might be making the next eBay. I could be wrong. It might be too early though, but the more time I spend with them, the more I understand what they're doing, and they're ex-Amazon people. So like, it's not that they don't know what they're doing. So we'll see. I'll let you know after the show, all that kind of stuff. But that's where I'm kind of looking at, is like, I'm trying to be wowed, right? Like I was wowed by these other people in 21, and that's very rare these days on the Nostr side, but maybe there's something here with what they're doing. The other thing I just want to ask you, we'll just do rapid fire right now, just real quick, because I have, I know I don't want to take up too much of your time. You're far more busier than I am. Favorite album of all time?
Oh man.
Doesn't need to be your top one, just like your favorite album.
Wow. That is really hard. Favorite album. Well, I don't know about favorite album. I have to think a bit more on this, but I'll give you some of my favorite sort of bands and artists of all time that just come to mind. The Brian Jonestown Massacre. I really love. Really psychedelic rock and shoegaze. Oh, for sure. Favorite band and album of the last year. This band Wednesday put out an album. I'm blanking on the name right now, but their album from last year is just like also kind of like, I'm not really into country, even though I'm from the South, but it was kind of like country shoegaze. I think they're like the best band I've seen live since BJM. So definitely that. On the hip hop side, I'm obviously very in hip hop. Used to release records myself. Hopefully we'll be back in that one day. There's a lot of good music coming out right now. I think in recent years, obviously favorites of all time, Jay Dilla, Madlib. I love those guys as producers, and listen to whatever kind of stuff they've inspired. There's a lot of rappers putting out cool stuff in the underground right now. I've been this guy, Huss Kingpin. I really like some of his new stuff. He has this album called Portis Huss, which is like kind of an exploration of Portishead inspired beats. Wow. Dope. I love trip hop and like kind of like late 90s electronica. So Portishead, Massive Attack. I love in that sort of like electronic genre, Boards of Canada. That's a fantastic group that I wish they would put out some more stuff. I love music. I like a lot of different stuff. This guy, I think one of the guys that's most slept on in the world, actually I'll throw a couple, Odd Nostum, I don't know how you even say it. He was part of a group called Cloud Dead. That album, by the way, the Cloud Dead original album is insane. It's kind of like experimental hip hop. He's one of the best beat makers I think ever, and very slept on. This lady Lali Puna, I think, has a really cool electronic app that's like act that's super slept on. So yeah, man, I like a lot of music.
I'll ask you one last question, because you dropped so much alpha right there. I need to go back and listen to all these. Another thing I've been doing is like going on Wavelake. I'm about to do a post for Sam and those guys. And I went and kind of did the whole discovery thing. I found like 8 really great songs. So watch out for that. But
I need to play more on Wavelake. And actually, before that, just one quick question I meant to ask you earlier.
Yeah.
You said Wavelake is going to flip the narrative. Why are you so bullish on this project particularly?
So the one thing that, and Keon was early on this too, because I remember I was at the time in 21, he was talking about, or 22, we did a post. One of the guys who writes for Thriller did a post on it, and we released it, and it was so early, but I remember saying, I was like, Keon, I don't know, like, and then it wasn't until here recently, I would say within around TabConf, after talking to Michael and really thinking through like how he views it and where it was headed, I realized the thing that they're not even touching yet is the audience participation. So all the things that makes Spotify great aren't yet built into WAV Lake. And I don't mean just like the infrastructure or the talent pool or the albums. I mean all the social interactions, the following, the followers, the playlists. I think the playlist feature on itself is going to be something that's just going to blow us out of the mind as far as like, and they're going to have to think through of the mechanisms of how that's prismed out amongst everybody. And that's when I think when we get to that point, Max, we're going to see far more people start launching apps in this kind of like ecosystem. And I think once we get the musicians are going to come regardless, but the culture is really what's going to make that happen. So,
and I love these like value for value music podcasts that are happening.
Yeah.
Like I love the idea, like one day, and this is where Nostr actually is potentially interesting, right? Because like Wavelake,
yes,
like all Nostr, right? So you get like all that social stuff with you.
That could probably be the thing that actually gets Nostr ahead of everything. And I don't think people are thinking through those, at least not yet, right? But if you have something like a Wavelake or like a Fountain that's doing all these things and it's utilizing Nostr, right? That could be the thing that actually get Nostr off the ground. Is the music aspect of it. It's the same thing we saw with Napster. It's like, well, why was Napster so great? Oh, it's because you traded MP3. No, dude, it wasn't until Apple came out with with their iPod and iTunes and the iMac and the CD burner and all that stuff where people were like, no, now you can actually use these MP3s legally. And so it's the same thing all over again. This is why I love Sam and the way he thinks, that team, the way they think through things. It's so painfully obvious, Max.
Well, and I love this idea of like, as someone that loves, and sounds like I know you do as well, like music and curating music. I think the curator, like the artist for sure, but also the curators are like, if you're doing like cool DJ sets or like making cool playlists and you can get paid to make playlists, like, man, I just think that's going to be a killer.
So when I was talking to the artist about this, I just had an artist on here recently, and then she's telling me on the other side of why something like this works, on the publishing side, on the right side, Max, and this, you're a musician. So to me, when you see these things connect, it's going to be like, it's just going to go like this straight up. And then people are gonna be like, whoa, we missed it. And you'd be like, no, you didn't. You just weren't paying attention. And I think that's where we're kind of headed with anyway.
Yeah.
So last question. What's the last piece of art that you've enjoyed or appreciated that whether it's art, music, anything, like what's film, like what's the last thing that you've appreciated that just really wowed you?
Well,
book.
Let me see if I've got it. Yes. I don't think I have it. Actually, I do have it right in front of me. So I just finished reading this book called Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. And this is, this I think is perhaps one of the best explanations of what humanity is and where we're going that I've ever read. And I would say it's something like a more maybe psychedelic Sapiens. And it's just next level. And so the thesis of it is he basically looks at the brain and he has a lot of these questions about the self-referential nature of consciousness, basically like, then this is something that we talked about the Bitcoin Ouroboros, but I think it's just like, it's a function of consciousness. And you can see this in mathematics, like with Gödel's incompleteness theorem, like you're not separate from everything else, but you're a subset of that everything else, but you can't see everything else because you're just one piece of it. Yeah. And anyway, so he riffs a lot on that and talks about, the different circuits in the brain and kind of how consciousness, or like how organisms have evolved and where we might be evolving to next. And I think it's both just fascinating and also really interesting for me, like even from an investing perspective in a way, because I think, we kind of went from the industrial age to the agricultural age, hunter-gatherers, agricultural, industrial, and now in information. We're just getting started at the information age. But the logic of each of those ages is almost like a quantum leap. It's just like a totally different thing. And I think the logic of economics in this age is also going to be radically different. When you have extremely cheap energy, you have, nearly instant free or almost free payments around the world, sharing, like the things that are still scarce are obviously Satoshis and attention. And so I think that's partially why I'm so bullish on open source and sharing, right? Like the more you share, the more you kind of get people hooked into your ideas and grow that, group around your ideas, the better position you are to be not like hoarding. And this is one thing where I also, have somewhat of a different view than a lot of Bitcoiners, but being in the middle of flows. And that's why I like Lightning Network so much, is it's a flow network. Your Bitcoin is not stagnant. People are rewarded for figuring out where to point that flow. And I think that's kind of just like the logic of the network. And anyways, we can riff a lot more on that, but this book is fantastic. If those topics interest you, I suggest checking it out.
Yeah, we're going to check it out. Yeah, it's a scarcity versus the abundance mindset. And I think a lot of founders have to struggle with that. But once you get to the, there is no scarcity. It's more abundance that you, that's when you really, things start cooking. Awesome.
It's always good to be reminded of that. And I know that, sometimes, it's like, it's your physical reality may not yet reflect that. And we all go through periods of forgetting. And, even if you have all the material stuff, maybe you lose some of the spiritual abundance or whatever you want to call it. But it's good to be reminded, and it's good to have friends around you. And that's what you guys have in PlebLab, to keep you motivated and keep you, pushing for abundance for all.